So the crazy thing is, I feel like this is the first time in history where we can somewhat more or less put a dollar value to intelligence.
A lot of products are building workflows right now around that, like it takes 3 minutes to do something useful expectation. But if that's down to a second in 2 years, like that's a pretty different world to be living in.
I think the reason is that he had this very uncomplicated but very appealing relationship with technology and the future, and like his vision wasn't pretentious or it was just let's make insanely great products to enrich people's lives. Hey
All
man,
right,
how
we're
you
live.
doing?
I'm good. Big day.
Yeah, custom agents is available to most people. But the thing that's funny is I actually woke up not thinking too much about custom agents because we've been thinking about them for a long time, right? It's like a gradual rollout. But then I realized that today was Steve Jobs' birthday, and they did a very cool on the Steve Jobs archive. They wrote like they had a bunch of creators, anyone from Johnny Ive, Tim Cook, tons of people, uh, um, sort of write advice for what they would tell people who are sort of maybe starting their career is the wrong word, right? But like their journey as a builder,
Well,
and um, it just made me. It actually made me miss Steve Jobs, which is weird because I never met him. The closest I've ever gotten to meeting him is he signed up for Cloud App and used it for a hot 5 minutes
no.
a long time ago, and for
For
no
those who
reason.
don't know, Cloud App is Max's old startup. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, presumably because it was the number one on the Mac App Store, like with the name Cloud, and I would assume he was like, "Wait, what is this? Why is this not iCloud?" But um, yeah,
Before
I
he goes
just
and yells at the mobile me team, he has to try an app
yeah,
that's actually good.
um, yeah, just yeah, it's so bizarre to be able to miss someone who you've never met, and I think that the reason I don't know, I texted you this morning. I was like, "Oh, let's just chat and record. Who cares?" Um, I think the reason is that he had this very uncomplicated but very appealing relationship with technology and the future, and like his vision wasn't pretentious or it was just let's make insanely great products to enrich people's lives. Where and the I think the latter part of that sentence is the thing that should be bold, which is enrich people's lives. And I often find myself, I don't know how you feel about this, but longing for a time where technology was less about getting rich quickly, right? Like, I don't know, crypto
Yeah.
and increasingly more so AI as well, right? Like, there's just this very frenetic layer on top of computing that I just find both exhausting and how do we not have better role models today?
Yeah, I miss him too, man. My history is like I've gone through cycles of like he's my idol. Oh wait, he was actually kind of like a shitty person sometimes. But then I've kind of like I feel like I reached a point where yeah, I miss him too. I never met him or got even close to meeting him. But like you told me to I didn't know it was his birthday, but I went to my bookshelf and got this. I don't know if you have this, but it's like the fancy book of all his quotes that you can buy on like the black market off eBay or whatever. Because it was never sold. But I was just reading back through his stuff, and yeah, like I feel like we don't have tech CEOs like that as much right now. Like I'm not even the ones who I really respect, I don't like admire them in the same way. And I think there's something about his like hippie side, or like the kind of the soul that he had in addition to his like brutal um like success side or whatever that was just like so cool, you know.
You know the quote. I think it's the quote from he said, "Oh, if Bill Gates had dropped some acid or something at some point in his career, Microsoft would make better products." And I think obviously, I mean, you don't have to tell people in the Bay Area to drop acid, right? Like they do this at Burning Man. But I think there's a subtle difference if you're trying to find yourself versus if you're trying to do it recreationally. And so to me, I think that he was just deeply in awe with what humans are capable of. And like there's this, I don't know, maybe we can add this somehow. I don't want to make your editing harder, but like there's this quote that or where he talks about one day you wake up and realize that the world is made up by people no smarter than you. and he has sort of this explanation of you realize that you can poke life, and then
Yeah.
life reacts, and something pops out on the other end. I may have misquoted him, but I think
It's
to
actually in
me,
the last page of this book. Here, I'll read it. I'll read it
uh,
like I literally have the book ready. It says, the minute you understand that you can understand that you can poke life, and if you push in, then something will pop out the other side, that you can change it, that you can mold it. That's maybe the most important thing.
I mean, I think that's why you and actually, somebody on the last recording that we did sort of joked that we might be contractually obligated to mention malleable software. I guess we'll keep the streak running here. But like to me, that's why
Check.
malleable software is the thing that I is interesting to me. It wakes people up to the idea that they can change the world around them.
You know, the funny irony of that too, though, is like Steve, I think, gets a lot of blame from computer nerds who believe in malleable software stuff for making computers dumber. And in fact, I sort of like uh, also blame modern Apple to some extent for making computers like uh, sort of more like made of safe plastic and not treating the user with respect as someone who can wield a powerful tool. And so I think there's this fascinating tension there that I often think about where it's tricky though, because I don't fully agree with the nerds. One of my favorite Steve videos is there's some dev conference, I think in the mid 90s, right after they killed OpenDoc, which is this legendary, really cool approach to like composing little bits of software that are not apps. They're like smaller, and you can make these compound documents, and there was all this nerd stuff. And Steve killed it when he came back. And this dev gets up at the conference and it's like, why'd you kill OpenDoc? You have no idea what you were, whatever. And Steve's answer is basically like, you can't do everything. You got to focus. And I want to solve real problems that matter the most. And so, sorry, you know, and I thought it was a kind of a good encapsulation of Steve's attitude towards that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that so the two product-y shaped things that he has said that really appeal to me is that quote. I think something like, "You can't make everybody happy all the time, but you can make some people happy some of the time," or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And building great products can't mean you have to build a product for everybody. It needs to be a product for some group of people that you want to build for. And even, yeah, disagree with the nerds to some, like, because think about Apple introducing what is it, iLife, and then or the creative, I forget what they're called, but like the iMovie and GarageBand and so on. They're arguably much more complicated tools than most social media today. And at the same time, they're not pro tools either. But they tried to push the envelope of what people can make with computers consistently, maybe even at the cost of profit early on. Of course, now Apple, it still seems to have that DNA, but it's a much different company. In fact,
Yeah.
I don't know how good Steve would be at running today's Apple, but yeah.
I remember I think Steve was really, really psyched about GarageBand on the iPad because just the idea that you have this slab that like a teenager could have in their room and you can make like a studio quality album on it was so like alive to him, you know? And I think that's such a cool, yeah, it's like, I mean, you know, it's classic Steve stuff. It's bicycle for the mind, right? That is really bicycle for the mind. It's enhancing the human creative process.
Yeah, I think finding awe in creation is perhaps I mean, that's basically, I think, why you and I work at Notion. You mentioned sort of, oh, a lot of modern software is like the plastic thing. We actually internally have neither you nor I coined this. This, I think, existed way before us, but we have this saying of, is it a Lego brick? Because Notion is about composable Lego bricks and you can make anything with it. And then the antithesis of that is a horsey piece. So a molded plastic single purpose thing. And we often look at our products as like horsey pieces versus Lego bricks. And that tension is very real because a horsey piece is pretty easy to use. And it has a single purpose and it's probably going to be good at that. And then you have Lego bricks where you have more malleability, but you have to perhaps put more effort into it. Um,
Yeah.
Tug
My
of war.
other, uh, my other favorite Steve story is from Ken Costienda's awesome book about the development of the iPhone keyboard. And there's a number of great Steve demo stories in there, but my favorite one is they were working on the iPad keyboard, I think, and they basically took two keyboard designs to Steve and were like, we're actually going to ship these with a mode switcher, because sometimes you want one, sometimes you want the other. And he was like, dude, no, like you're gonna have one and you're gonna pick one right now. Which one's better? And then he picked one and it was like, great, ship that one. And that was the end of the meeting. And it's such a simple story, but that one always sticks with me.
I don't know if it, I think the thing that I find most interesting is how good he was at distilling complicated things into simple things. I remember he was on some D10 or whatever conference with Walt Mossberg and Kara Swisher, I think. And they were giving him crap for maybe it was Flash, sort of not having Flash on mobile.
Yeah.
And he just summarized the entire conversation of, look, we're gonna make a product and either users will go and buy them or they won't, and life will find a way. And it's just such a simple, refreshing attitude towards product development, which perhaps also, I don't know, maybe that lends to Apple is pretty good at iterating, I would say. I think they're pretty good at like most of their products weren't a hit from day one. And then they just relentlessly iterate. But ultimately, they're just like, yep, we're gonna maniacally just make a good product, which is um, and without hype, if that makes sense. In fact, whenever they hype things up too much,
Mhm.
sorry, they're very good at marketing, but that's not the same thing as the fake
Like they don't
hype.
get ahead of themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in
At
fact,
least until last year.
every time they do, because of outside pressure, I think they live to regret it.
Mm. Yeah.
AI
I
and
mean,
Siri and so on being the biggest example.
I think part of the focus thing too is like they build for themselves when they're at their best. Like I love how iPhone was such a tiny team. It Every time I think about how small the iPhone team was, it blows my mind. And also the fact that they basically didn't show it to anyone, like even inside the company, and they just like built, the biggest advance in interfaces of the past few decades. I think a lot about that example because when I think about how most people build products and then how they built that product, there's a big gap. And so if that's what it takes to build the best thing, like, no focus groups, no external user testing, very little process, extreme individual ownership, like you make the keyboard good, you have 1 year type stuff, I think is just so like it's less collaborative. I don't know. It was very collaborative in some ways, but it's a strong culture of you do this. I just think is like, yeah, I think about that example a lot and what it means for like how we should be building stuff.
He says he has this thing where he says teamwork means trusting that others will come through with their part of the work. And think about how far removed most corporate culture is from that, right? Like deeply trusting that you can focus on your thing and do the best thing there because you know that the system around you, others will come through and deliver their part, right? And if you have that way of working, then I think you build really, really cool stuff. I'm curious, what do you think? So the reason I miss him is also not just because he generally had inspiring things to say, but because I assume that he wasn't a huge fan of social media, given what we've heard. And I also don't know what he would think of AI today. There's this clip that goes around every once in a while where he talks about at some dinner that in the future we'll be able to talk to Aristotle or Socrates or whatever with something in our pocket kind of thing. And of course, we're very close to that to some degree. I mean, or it's mirages of those people, but it's the closest I'll ever get to talk to Socrates. How do you think? Yeah, I don't know. What do you think his take would be on today's AI?
That's a
Dangerous
really good
territory, of
question.
course.
I don't think that he would like the emoji thing. What are they called? The AI generated picture thing. That's one of the most slop adjacent things I think. Apple has done, even though like they've tried really hard to not make themselves. There's something about them that feels very strange and un-Apple to me. I can't quite put my finger on it. Um,
It's funny, it didn't even occur to me. I didn't even mean Apple because Apple is so far
mm,
behind on
yeah, yeah.
AI. I
In
didn't
general,
it
yeah,
didn't even occur to me that they also have AI products. I mean more the general, what's the future of the bicycle for the mind? We have this new
yeah,
capability and so on.
yeah. I wish I knew. I think like the reason I feel like it's so hard to answer is that I feel like he had such a unique gift for seeing the technological capability that was coming in very clear terms and then figuring out a way to apply it that actually solved a problem that was different from how everyone else was thinking about it, or not even necessarily different, but just like a more refined take. Um, I don't think Steve Jobs wanted to build like enterprise productivity software, and so I don't think he would have been that interested in that application. But um, I think in when we think about like the GarageBand on the iPad thing, it's tough to know. Like when my gut is that he wouldn't have liked um, one click generate a whole AI song because there's something weird about that vibe, even though it can be a fun toy. I don't know. What do you think?
Because I think he was deeply humanist. I think it's very hard to be humanist and saying one click AI art or one click songs. It's not humanist. That is the, I put zero effort into it and now I have this thing that is remotely entertaining, or sort of just releases dopamine. Um,
Yeah, I mean, he loved
and
Bob Dylan, right? It's like so not. I like Bob. I feel like Bob Dylan would never do that, you know, or the
yeah,
Beatles. I don't know.
the closest might be that he bought Siri for a reason. Right? I don't know if you remember the original Siri app, green and white, and on the tiny iPhone 4 or whatever. And the demo was something like, "Can you order a pizza?" And it could order. Actually, the funny thing is, it could make a phone call or something. I don't remember, but like I know there was a pizza involved, in sort of ordering a pizza. And the funny thing is, today Siri is very, very far away from
It's
ordering a
gone
pizza.
backwards.
Uh, but there was clearly something around the idea that if you can just talk to your computer, the magic incantations, right? Like we talked about this last time, Apple script is sort of this delusion that, hey, look, we made the syntax so simple because it sounds like English, but then it's still not quite like English. I think that would be really appealing to him. And I suspect he probably, maybe he would have leaned more into ad hoc generative UI kind of thing, and not the let anyone make Comic Sans UIs approach, but how do I decompose iOS into the individual important UI paradigms, and then when I have a conversation with Siri, I the things are ad hoc generated, but still at a quality bar that I think he would not scoff at, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're all this is all speculation, right? We have no idea.
Of course, I mean
I think
that's
he had such an appreciation for beauty and craft and perfection that it's hard to imagine, um, him being happy with people using like random slop that was generated. I do think there's something about like this idea that anyone can just use a computer without the pain and frustration of just like, a grandma can just talk to their computer and it does stuff that I think would have been appealing. It's funny, one Steve story that I think a lot about with regard to generative UI. It's not quite the same thing, but there's a famous story from the Mac era, early Mac days, where they were trying to make the calculator app, and they kept bringing the design to Steve, and he'd be like, it looks ugly, like move that around, give all this very detailed feedback. They go and fix it, and then the next week they go back, and he's like, still dead, you know, um, to redo it again. And um, what they ended up doing was they made this thing called the Calculator Construction Kit, which was a meta app with all these sliders where Steve could design the calculator himself. And then he dialed in and was like, boom, now I like it. And it's funny because I don't know if I don't think Steve would have wanted to expose that to end users. I think he wanted that control. But that pattern of actually giving people a little scaffold to tweak the app is actually something that I think is super relevant in today's world. Um, when I'm like using an LLM to make something, I want like that's sort of the experience I want. I want the kit for making the thing I want. And you don't have to have the LLM make the thing you want. You can actually have it make a kit for you to make the thing you want, which I think is just a fun pattern.
I think Fifth Paper by 53 had this too. There's this great video somewhere by one of their designers. They were tweaking the animations and so on of like how do you make the paper feel as it flips, sort of very natural, and like how much drop shadow should it sort of have. And I think they also made the sort of constructions like you would tap a couple of times in the top corner and then you could change the sliders and tweak it. And over months, sort of they would just tweak what feels better. And then I think Brian Lovin from Notion design team was recently on a podcast talking about our playground, the sort of design playground. And if you look, one of the things that's true for almost every single prototype in there is a little menu in the bottom right where you can tweak parameters with sliders or
Yeah.
variants and so on, right? And maybe the right answer is if you build the construction kit, which Notion is a construction kit, right? Then the top of the class gets to do the hard work of the curation. And most people find a thing because the sort of cost of production goes down. Most people find a thing that actually appeals to them, but it's all in an environment that is somewhat safe and you don't have to start from assembly.
Uh, Maybe that's a good segue to talking about what we launched today. Um, Totally unplanned, by the way. We're just doing this off the cuff. We thought it'd be fun to chat, but I guess like so we launched this thing, custom agents. I think it'd be fun. Like, can you? I actually wasn't at the company when this project kicked off, and you had just joined, and I think we're heavily involved in kind of getting this thing off the ground. Can you tell a bit of the story of like, because I actually don't know, like, how did this thing start?
So what most people don't know is that last year, right when I joined, there was a project called App Builder, which was essentially, hey, look, these models are getting very, very good at writing code. Why don't we use them to write ad hoc code for a lot of business processes? So I don't know, you can imagine every Monday morning, I want you to label a new row in this database with this tag and then do some other thing and some other thing. And Notion's always had, or not always, but has had automations for quite some time. And the way they work is you have a trigger and then a single action can happen. And it's both really simple in terms of, or they're both very, they're not straightforward. In fact, most people struggle with the if this then that because it doesn't quite fit their mental model, but they're also not extremely capable, right? It's like just a subset of things you can do. And so the idea with App Builder was, well, why not just have a Turing machine where you can do anything with scripts? And what ended up happening is at the time, I forget what the frontier models were, but you would, as a normal user, and like my example is always Sheila in accounts receivable, you would ask, hey, can you give me a report every Monday morning about X, Y, and Z? And then you would just see TypeScript errors because the agent would go write some TypeScript and whatnot.
Mm.
And that is not a good experience for someone who doesn't want to see code. And so instead, what we shipped is what's now known as the Notion agent, which is just, it's an iteration on many previous things. Like what people maybe also don't remember is that the first version of Notion Assistant came out before ChatGPT was a thing, or like two
Which is
weeks before.
crazy because
Very,
no, I mean, in terms of the broader world, people's attention was not on GPT
yes.
before that release. Yeah.
So that was Notion Agent. And then, of course, the very immediate after you have this very synchronous Notion agent, well, why not have a what we call custom agents now, which the anatomy of a custom agent is always you have a trigger, and it could be software that you use, right? And you can imagine like Sentry alerts, a new Slack message, a new reaction, a new row in a database in Notion, that kind of thing. And then you have natural language instructions, and you always, I don't know if I fully agree with you. You always say, oh, Notion is the best prompt editor in the world. I think I understand why you say it. Personally, I'm still
My
very,
take is
very,
that it should become. I'm not sure it is right now.
it might be the most approachable one, I think, if we do it right. But
Well, and just to defend my position there, like where do you edit prompts with other people, right? Like collaborating on prompts is such a big part of it, and like I don't know like what the answer is out in the broader world for non-engineers. Like, are you supposed to put them in Git? Are you supposed to put them in like a Google Drive or something? I don't know. Like when your prompt is a Notion page, what I like I was hacking on a custom agent last week with someone else, and we literally are on a call, both typing into the prompt at the same time, working out different sections, and then when we're done, we hit run. And like I think that's like really like kind of slept on as a thing you want in your prompt editor. So
yeah,
yeah.
I agree, especially for collaboration and multi sort of person teams and agent setups and so on. But yeah, so you have a trigger, then you have instructions that are just plain English, and then you have to painstakingly add permissions and access to tools to every custom agent. And the reason we did that is because we don't want magic inheritance of permissions that could go wrong very quickly. We've seen some examples of that online. And so instead, it's like, no, 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 you're the creator of this. You are essentially adding access to these resources, for example, pages, Slack channels, and so on. And you are, it's sort of, it is, you're on the hook for this, right? You as the user are on the hook for giving this agent access. And that has been rolling out for a while. Companies are using it for absolutely crazy things. I've seen everything from sort of nonprofits using it to save them, hours a week to ramp running half their business on them. And today, I think we did a bigger push of it's now available to everybody. But that's sort of the story of custom agents.
I'm curious, like so it's been, it's been going on for a while. I mean, we've been using it internally for a long time. I'm like, what's most surprised you? I think the basic idea of the product shape hasn't changed that much over this whole journey, but like now you've seen a bunch of people use it and stuff. I don't know. What have you changed your mind about?
I was very worried about how technical the product was to understand. And I would have compared the usage data to previous automation stuff and so on. And I was just wildly incorrect in terms of more people seem to be okay with working through stuff with an agent, especially if they can iterate in chat back and forth. So I think that's a thing that has changed for me. Um, which then also leads to, might be an interesting conversation, which is cost. I was both, there's three things that I can't square. One, companies that have found value in custom agents are like totally fine paying how much custom agents cost. And then other folks are using custom agents, embedding them into their workflows, but because it was an alpha and beta, sort of they didn't know, and so there's a little bit of a sticker shock there, I think. And how can both be true sort of is really about how much value are you actually getting out of automating parts of it, right? Like, I don't know. An example is I have a personal agent to read every single email, and I I'm using Opus for it, and so the agent is
Wow.
actually very, the
That's a
agent is
luxury
actually
choice.
yeah, the agent is very expensive right now. I think it's like $300, right? And I'm just not going to pay $300 to read every single
Per
email
month?
per month, yeah. But just switching it to other models, it reduces it by 10x, right? And I think finding the balance of where it's useful. I mean, I love it because I
That's
haven't
actually
read it
cheaper than I would have expected. I mean, when I'm thinking in value terms, like how much does an EA cost, right? So it's like actually, um, I guess for someone like I assume you get a lot of email and you actually have to read some of them. So that's an interesting like it's. I thought you were going to say like $3,000 or something, which
but
would have been maybe more of a question.
well, I think the meta point here is maybe this is the thing that's weird, right? Depending on how much I know a startup CEO that is actually responding automatically to most inbound emails with a custom agent. And the value of every single email is probably in the hundreds of dollars if that first contact with the customer
Hmm.
is good. And so that's a no-brainer. And then for me, for my personal email, I just don't care enough, right?
Oh, this
And
is your personal email. I see. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And it's not zero, right? But it's not 300. So it's somewhere in between. And I think to me, the thing that we are all going to realize very quickly is that the thing that matters is intelligence per second per dollar. And if you don't have a dollar denominator in this equation, all of what we're doing right now doesn't really matter, right?
I'm
And
curious, like, how do you think so personal is totally separate, but when orgs buy AI stuff and it's getting more and more pricey, like, how do you think that organizations are or should be thinking about like those cost decisions? So like my exposure to this is from Notion buying AI coding credits, basically, and I'm the one using them. And for the most part, our policy is kind of like let it rip. Engineers are discouraged from even like knowing how much they're spending because I think we're more worried that they would underspend than that they would overspend. But then now I think Anthropic is pushing us with their Opus Fast, which I see as their experiment. And like basically, I think it's a price elasticity experiment, of like how infinite truly is the demand. And um, I've been in some internal discussions where we're trying to figure out how valuable it is. And I'm kind of like, oh man, this is really freaking valuable for me. Like I feel like I'm moving prototypes. I'm gaining days relative, or whatever. I'm gaining like large percentage productivity increase relative to Opus Slow even. And so then we're like, okay, when the dollar amounts are getting so big, like how should we think about it? And this is gonna be the same question I think that you're talking about for custom agents customers, right? Of like, um, it's actually ridiculous that you might be willing to spend 100K a year plus on one automation, which sounds really expensive as like SaaS, or whatever, but it's doing enough value. So like, how do you see that playing out?
so the crazy thing is, I feel like this is the first time in history where we can somewhat more or less put a dollar value to intelligence, right?
Hmm.
Sort of theoretically, I mean, clearly, if you look at the stock market right now, where a single Anthropic tweet can, drop a stock, the efficient market hypothesis was
Software's
obviously
dead.
was always
Software's
bullshit,
back.
right? Um, but I think the loop of figuring out how valuable something was just really long, and I think now that loop is sort of getting shorter and shorter. And so, to me, the way I think about it, or the way we think about it internally at Notion, is right now there's a lot of uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty, it's okay to deploy capital sort of faster and more to say, wait, let's just experiment, find what's valuable with a small sort of exploratory crew, and then we can bring that practice to a larger
Yeah.
org, and then you do sort of cost optimization. And most companies are the same way. There's a customer that we've been working with custom agents for a while that is basically replacing $300,000-400,000 software tools internally with custom agents, and so that's a lot of money, right? And so for them, sort of the pricing sort of aligns. Um, and so I think, okay, maybe this is maybe a dumb analogy. The way I think about it is, what makes a great food city? And lots of people like saying, hey, San Francisco is a great food city. And there is no question that there are many amazing restaurants in San Francisco. But the average price per plate is sort of always it's very hard to get a good dinner that is cheap. If you compare that to both New York or, for example, London, you can both eat at a hole in the wall
Or
place.
Tokyo.
Or
Tokyo,
Tokyo
which is
is an
king
even
of
better
this.
example. Yeah, Tokyo is a sort of, yeah, let's take Tokyo as an example. Um, I think that's what makes a great food city. And so if I think about what makes a great agent city, I think it should stretch as far as for sort of extremely commoditized models. I'm thinking of like an OSS 120B from OpenAI or whatever. That should be basically free, all the way to you should have frontier models and then you pay. And I think it's our job to figure out how to make that as broadly distributed as possible, because otherwise capital and having money to spend matter so much in the future. And I don't know. It's the opposite of the Steve Jobs story, right? The Steve Jobs story is great. Yes, you have to spend a lot of money on an iPad Air or whatever, but you can even buy like a 3 generation old one. And then you install GarageBand and suddenly you have a music studio in your, I mean, people who actually have real music studios would probably disagree with me, but like you have a metaphorical music studio in your house. And it, I think we need to figure out how to make that true for AI as well. And uh, or, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question on cost that I'm curious about then, like, it's sort of not up to us in the sense that we're going to offer all the models and people will have a cost spectrum they can choose from. But in terms of how the costs actually end up playing out, I guess the question is, when is the frontier going to get so good that it's too good? And the behind frontier becomes good enough for a lot of stuff, which I feel like clearly has not happened yet in coding. We keep thinking like, oh my God, the model's so good. But then like the next one comes out and no one ever wants to use 1 generation back for like anything, you know? And the
yeah.
frontier prices are stable basically. And so I'm really curious to see how that will play out.
I don't know if we have an answer for it. I suspect you can ground things in some truth, which is similar to a retina display for certain eyes. Like like a friend of mine
Yeah, yeah.
was like, I don't need a retina display. I cannot see the difference, right? And so I think there are tasks where you just don't need the frontier model, and so
For sure.
those get pushed down.
Yeah.
And so at constant, I always think about it as constant intelligence. It is a
Yeah.
race to the bottom in terms of price. And
And that's, to be clear, that's already true for some tasks today. Like you can
yes,
do whatever basic summarization or lookups with a cheaper model. But um, the like when I'm in Notion AI, which is like a full-fledged agent doing arbitrary tasks or running custom agents, I tend to want expensive models. And so um, I don't know. In my
uh,
experience, most tasks are at the frontier still.
yeah, somebody was joking that the biggest perk of working at Anthropic and OpenAI is the unlimited token budget or whatever. My, you said, oh, do people like don't make about Notion? Do people who are not at the labs have any kind of cost control? And I think one thing that has happened is that we have in our love for LLMs and software 2.0, I think the way Karpathy coined it, it feels like we have forgotten that software 1.0 is a thing. And what I mean by that is right now, even if you look at, I mean, obviously I'm more familiar with the deployment of custom agents, but if you look at a bunch of custom agents, there are agents that are extremely expensive, $1 per run, $2 per run, or whatever. And all they do is label a thing in a very imperative and sort of predictable way. And the way I think that should work is an LLM writes some code, going back to the origin story
Yeah,
of all of this.
full circle.
And then that deterministic piece of code executes at CPU prices instead of GPU prices, which is perhaps, I guess we can, it is publicly available to people, but we're just not talking about it. There's a product that I think is more interesting than custom agents right now that we snuck out today as well called Workers. We don't know. We might call it something else. We'll see. But it's essentially like a tiny VM in the cloud, and a custom agent can call tools in there. But a future iteration might also disintermediate the LLM entirely. So you basically use an LLM, and you can use Notion AI, you can use Codex, Claude Code, Cursor, pick whatever you want, and write a piece of code that sort of abstracts a business process. And then you deploy it, and then from then on, you're charged CPU prices versus GPU prices, right? So 3 orders of magnitude probably difference. I don't know. And to me, that's where we have a lot of control, aka caching. It's like caching of intelligence is how I think about it.
I love the caching analogy. I think this is so emblematic of where things are probably going to go, which is like the product we released today is primarily English is the program. And then you're basically talking about generating code generation as a cost and performance optimization, right? It's almost like just-in-time compilers where it's like you have an interpreter running and then, oh, like this one little bit of code is slow, so we'll like compile that bit, but the rest is fine. And I almost feel like it's like that's actually almost a perfect analogy, I think, where like you have an English interpreter that's like slow and expensive, and we should note unreliable, which is another piece. And
Yeah,
I
it
always
is.
remember, yeah,
It is
like
really funny. It is a high level language to something lower level to something lower level to eventually like,
yeah,
I agree.
the tricky thing I think is like the cost of code generation. Like there's a balance where you end up with a less uniform interface possibly. I mean, maybe you abstract it away fully where it's purely an implementation detail, but you never saw the code. The LM just like using it behind the scenes or something. But I still think like there's complexity cost when you have these systems that span these like caching is hard to do and causes its own problems, right? And so I'm really curious as the cost landscape evolves, like where is it going to be worth the compile to code step? I'm always reminded of this story actually happened on a past project we worked on at the research lab in Switch. We were working on version control algorithms, this project called Patchwork, and we were playing with how do you group version history to make it intelligible by humans. And we had two kinds of algorithms. We had deterministic ones like time, and we had not like LM ones like semantic ones. And I had been kind of prototyping them separately, but this was just for rapid prototyping. And at some point, I realized, wait, why am I writing any of these as code? I should actually be writing all of them as prompts because for a prototype, the full accuracy and the latency and cost, all that stuff doesn't matter. The prime imperative is actually having a really flexible, uniform interface for like expressing all of them. And then the moment, if I want to change it from time-based to like, oh, like time-based, but like if it's a weekday or a weekend, do blah blah blah. I can just like sit or I can just say stuff and it happens immediately. And so, um, I guess the point I'm trying to make is like that uniformity of like you can go from deterministic code to non-deterministic stuff instantly if everything was written in English from the beginning. It's like a really cool thing. And I actually think that's sort of even though you're talking about bringing code back into the picture, I think it's a really nice thing about the current custom agents interface is that the default is just natural language and there's, no other structure. That's sort of both the biggest strength and the Achilles heel, I guess, of the current product.
I think okay, so the way I think about this is you should clearly not bet on models getting worse, especially at coding. And so if you bet on models getting better at coding, then they're going to be able to one-shot the business process that you have at an increasingly higher success rate. The thing that matters though is if it's a 95% success rate, that's still a huge, I think what if like I'd had 10 steps, 95%, what is that, like 60,
And you're talking
60%
about them
overall?
doing code gen in this case, not direct inference. Okay, yeah.
Yep. So like 10 steps, each step 95% reliability, you end up with like a dot product of what, 60% or something like that?
Yeah.
So like slightly better than a coin flip. And
Better than direct inference, right? Maybe the direct inference gets you 95 and code gen gets you 99 or something,
yes.
but you're not at 8 nines. Yeah.
And so in a world where it is still 95% reliable or even 98, I think it is useful to show users the code, even if it's still slightly scary, but whatever. It's useful to show the code. And then the other thing that we can do is you can encapsulate that code in a reusable piece so that then someone else can just reference the thing and be like, hey, just go do that. GitHub Actions sort of works this way, right? GitHub Actions has the uses keyword. That was the first keyword we designed for GitHub Actions so that you don't have to write the same shell script over and over again, same sort of deal. I think perhaps if you think about it as the layer of abstraction, sort of like you have English and then it gets compiled and all the way down. As long as you keep around the source and you have test cases, aka evals as the kids call it now, then you can possibly imagine where improvements to the compiler actually improve the code under the hood and make the thing more reliable, right? And so then if you think about a custom agent run, right now every single run uses Opus or something really expensive. The next version of that is every, I don't know, 5 runs, 10 runs, I don't know, whatever, right? But at some point you're like, oh, only when X, Y, and Z changes do we recompile, right? And I
Yeah.
think that is a very compelling future. It also sort of maybe It's not super, I don't know, it's not super bitter lesson pilled because I feel like it's essentially still some sort of harness. But at the same time, if you remove the harness and the agent harnesses in the sort of computer that we have now of writing code to solve problems, then did models make that much of an improvement? I don't think so, right? And so it maybe it is bitter lesson in the sense that it's very general purpose. I don't know, but yeah, that's how I think about it. Sort of just progressive compilation of the same English. Yeah.
I guess the other bull case maybe for code is like if you're just writing glue and you're not writing the heart of the thing, then I think you can actually get like perfect reliability. It's like perfect example is like loop over 100 things and run this pre-existing function on all of them is like really hard for LLMs to do every time because like it's like, oh, got through 77 and got lazy. Can it always happen? Whereas in code, like that's like 3 lines of trivial code. And I think like all the direction of the MCP to like tool calling code, programmatic tool calling stuff, I think has very clearly shown us that like um, the basic control flow constructs of code are like worth having in the toolkit. So I think it's pretty bitter lesson filled. I mean, we're talking about like writing arbitrary code in Turing complete programming languages. I think that like generalizes well enough that it's like pretty AI filled. Yeah. Um, I have a question for you, which is like coming back to custom agents. Like, so we're doing this big launch. We're talking about all the things we love about them. Where do you see like what are the things you want to improve on the most, or like where do you see it going from here?
So there's so many things. Okay, first, what we just talked about, making this idea of workers, which I think you can install. Actually, Notion has a CLI now. It can only do workers, but npm install -g ntn. Uh, Shout out to the team for pushing that out quickly. Um, Workers just sort of very much expanding what custom agents can reach into, right? Like internally, we have access to like a custom agent can reach into Snowflake and do data analysis. It can make PowerPoint presentations. It can, in my case, I have like a Temu open claw called Notion Claw, which my workers can reach into my computer and like act on things locally. So I think it's just I think of that as a Cambrian explosion of tools is number one. Then probably the same needs to be true for triggers, right? So how many possible triggers and how easy is it? And then I think the big open question to me is the code caching slash how do you teach people to write good prompts or how do you teach people to iterate on it? And I think there, what the design team is sort of very bullish on is can you use, so right now you can set up a custom agent both through the settings UI, like clicking on stuff, but you can also just chat with it itself and it's sort of self-improving. And so what does a self-improving custom agent loop look like? We have a few internally that are feedback routers. So we have this crazy Slack channel that I think the entire company is in. And anyone can just yeet product feedback in there from customers, from whatever. And it used to take probably a PM a day a week to like sort of in aggregate, obviously every PM would do this, but like 1 PM a day a week to sort of make sure it lands in the right databases. And now there's just an agent watching it and doing it. The thing that's cooler about this is the agent did not, or sorry, no human really wrote the prompt for it. It's just a Notion page, and so it just keeps iterating on it. And um, that loop is really cool. And I think making that really easy for users is I don't know, high priority.
Yeah,
And then cost.
that's the loop that I'm excited the most too about, by the way, is like one mental model that I think is very generative is basically all the things that AI product engineers are doing and discovering best practices around are going to need to proliferate to a broader group of people building what are effectively AI products and all the same questions like, oh, a new model came out, like, is our thing going to work with it? Or, oh, like, I think this prompt improvement will work, but like, how do I know? Like, these are exactly the same questions that Notion's own AI team faces or any AI product development team faces when shipping, professionally engineered AI products. And so I think like it's the exact same problems trickling out. And I think sort of the solution shape is going to look like in some ways different because it's a less, these are not professional AI engineers, but I think some of the principles like the self-improving prompt thing, I was just on a call yesterday with a coworker who was showing we were fixing a prompting issue in one of our product things, and he was like, um, "We're clearly not going to edit the prompt. We're barely even going to edit the evals. We're going to work with an AI is going to suggest some better evals on this issue, and then once we'll like review that, and then we'll just hit go, and then the rest is full auto self improvement, saturate our eval, hill climb our prompt stuff, and um, I've been very like." I've talked to you before about I used to think that we should be getting designers and product managers internally more into writing prompts. It's not an engineering discipline really. Like what is the personality of the thing? You know, what does a good output feel like? But I've changed my mind on that. I actually think designers should be writing evals is the heart of it. Like once you define good, the part after that is an engineering optimization problem. Um, you know,
The big question I have is how do we, for things to be a bicycle of the mind, because I refuse to want to work on a thing where the future is everything is just automated and we are sedated, Wally, sort of whatever. I just don't care. Like you can pay me billions of dollars. I don't want that, right? I'd be at Meta if that were the case. Um, the question is how do you bring these very complicated things to more people? Because otherwise the world around you is just gonna like we're going back to the Middle Ages where nobody could write. I think about this so often, which is you would hire a scribe to write a love letter
oh
to
no.
your wife or whatever. It's like, how do you know what this person wrote? And so to me, with agents, it's the same thing, is how do you not accumulate this cognitive debt if you don't know how anything around you works anymore? And of course, like, yeah, sure, at some point maybe ASI, and the ASI will keep me happy as a pet. Great, we can cross that bridge when we get to that. Um, but until then, I think just giving people the tools to understand this and breaking it down is probably the single most important thing that I can think of personally to try and push, even if it's just like 1% personally.
I also think, I mean, in the shorter term, right? Like, regardless of your desire to understand, like, I've been in some ways surprised by how much the human stays in the loop in a lot of these workflows because you get out of one loop and then you're just up to the next one. And like, so far, you know, as long as people have jobs in these things, like, there are actually quite a few layers of loops you can be in, I find. And so, my take is like, for a while, we're going to need human in the loop workflows. And like, I guess I'm very interested in how we evolve, how the people stay involved. And my hunch is that part of that is increasingly kind of reviewing higher level artifacts like documents rather than being super in the weeds. But I'm also really curious about like I don't know. I think managing virtual people is one analogy that's very popular, and we use it some at Notion. And I think like there are some things that apply very well to that analogy. Like you still out an agent where a person would have been, and all the interface is the same. I think if you already had a collaboration tool for working with people, this is a story that you hope is true to some extent, probably because it means you have useful existing stuff. But I also think like if we play out the model capabilities further, like they're really different from people. Like they're going to get so fast. This is something that I think people are not like they're already in this uncanny valley of async sync where it's like make me a report and it takes like 3 minutes. If it took me a day, that's fine. That's like a person. If it took me like 1 second, then I'm not going to go away. But 3 minutes is this like weird thing. And I feel like we're building a lot of products are building workflows right now around that like it takes 3 minutes to do something useful expectation. But if that's down to a second in 2 years, like that's a pretty different world to be living. And what excites me about it is I think maybe that you feel less like you're delegating to a virtual person and it starts to be a much tighter um, loop that actually resembles more like traditional low latency GUI software where like there's some representation of the problem you're working with like effectively live, you know? And so we're not, I think, there yet because the models are too slow, but I just think I'm really excited to see how that evolves.
If I had to guess, so we obviously, I think custom agents have like these little faces, and Nosy has
They're
a
really
face
cute.
too.
Yeah. If you
They're
haven't seen
cute.
them, you should go check them out. It's like a whole
Yeah, they're like
generative
little
design
cute,
system and stuff.
sort of little cute fairies that you can talk to. So early on we had this design choice. Do we make them feel more like um, tools, or do we make them behave more like people inside of a Notion workspace? And I think we chose the right thing, even though long term, I think it's the wrong thing. So what I mean by that is, I think short term, it is much more important to get people used to the idea that because these models are trained on chatting, that you should probably back and forth chat with them to get a result, and like treat
Hmm.
it more as a sort of human to human interaction. And then I think long term, this is probably the wrong thing because it will not be like humans. And I don't like the analogy of like, I don't know, you hear this all the time of engineers are now managers. It's like, no, 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 like that's not a thing. Um, because we don't know, they're different, right? Like, to your point, they're not capped by biology. And at the same time, they don't yet have emotions and um, they don't even have goals, right? So,
Some of my favorite demos in this space, I mean, a bunch of people have done interesting stuff. Linus Lee, who used to be at Notion, published some interesting experiments with just like guiding writing by directly manipulating in latent space. So it's very simple. You have this like 2D canvas that's like one axis is like how long is the paragraph and the other is like how funny is it or something. And if your model's fast enough or you pre-generate a bunch of stuff, you can just like drag around in that space and this writing is changing live. And like that is not a conversational interface at all. And so I guess I agree with you. I think there's like a broad design space of interfaces. Most people are over fixated on chat with a virtual human, but actually that is a really good interface for a lot of stuff and it's the most familiar. So it's actually, I'm not against it. I think it's a really good starting point, but I also think there's like simultaneously, it's like useful to keep in mind the broader design space. There's like a paper that I really love about this topic by the academic Geoffrey here at University of Washington, where he basically points out, like my favorite example he gives is like spell check is an AI feature. That is like probabilistically guessing if you meant to spell a different word. But it's not this like cute little thing that comes in and says like, I think you got a word wrong. It's just like instantly there's a red squiggle and you see it and you pick it up, right? And it's very unobtrusive. He gives another example of like when you start typing a Google search in old Google and or maybe now Google, there's like an autocomplete box. That's a fully AI feature, but it's not like some little dude comes in to talk
mhm.
to you, And so like that is a possible way to wrap the LLM. I guess it's tricky because LLMs are both an implementation detail that they have language outputs, and it also happens to be a really good UI for many things to just directly expose it. And so it is easy to get confused and conflate the two, but that doesn't mean that chat is bad. It's kind of it's sometimes good, but it's not the whole story, I guess, is my take.
Yeah, I think direct manipulation and like chat is basically just a terminal of the future, right? Like it's a REPL,
Hmm. Yeah.
and you have built-in history, and you have the other thing that really helps there is you can stream tokens and keep the user entertained while the thing is thinking, and so on.
There's
Um,
only one thing to do, which is type the next
yeah,
thing. It's very linear. Yeah.
5 billion people know how to use a chatbot, kind of basically,
Yep.
because it's like texting your
There's already a
uncle on
bunch of
mobile.
chat apps that you already know how to use. Yeah.
And at the same time, I think for everything, you can see that sort of direct manipulation is interesting. I don't know if you saw like the Excel Claude next to Excel kind of thing. It's like, why are
Yeah.
you putting them together? Well, you're putting them together because you want that dance between the two. It doesn't work very well. I was disappointed because I'm like, oh wait, maybe I didn't have to learn Excel after all. But I'm sure it will at some point, right? And so I think like that's an indication of like humans do want to manipulate the artifacts that they're dealing with sort of more directly. But right now latency doesn't allow that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the holy grail is it should feel like you're sitting next to an Excel wizard who's like doing stuff with you and you're like pointing, like, do that, do that. You're talking with your voice, using your hands, like maxing out the bandwidth of your whole human body's like input and output, basically, is one way I think about it. And if the model can keep up with you in that, in theory, you should get to a very magical experience.
Given that um, TUIs are all the rage now, right? Because I think TUIs are this technology that makes it's so easy to make them fast, and it happens to speak in ASCII, so you get it's the native way to
Yeah.
deal with models, and then models
Although
are also this.
if you make a TUI in React, you can make it slow again. That's a whole other story.
Well, yes. Well, why would you do that? Uh, no, luckily, I think one of the biggest things that LLMs are killing is the write once, run anywhere.
For
Is
sure.
just No, use the right tool for the job, and you don't have to squeeze. Yeah, horrendous. Anyways,
It's okay. We love
but
you, Cloud Code, but yes.
TUI is really interesting because it's sort of the speed and latency. Um, Recently somebody did like a split screen where they had the TUI chat on the left with like codecs or whatever, and on the right it would render a UI. So for example, if you were booking a flight, it would show you the seat map and stuff, and it was all ASCII. And the reason is obviously just latency, right? The reason is just it's too slow to do it any other way, and it's the most token efficient sort of back and forth. And I think it would be really cool to try and do a demo with, I forget, I don't know what they're called, like Cerebrus and all the other, like there was a new one that like insane tokens per second. Just do a clone of like go one level up above the TUI. Maybe it's like macOS 9 or something else that you can run really fast on
Yeah.
modern hardware, and then just see like how does it feel to have an OS where I just hold down my Whisper Sync button and say actually do this instead, blah, 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 and you just immediately see it react. Then you pick up a pen or whatever, and I think a really cool demo on like iPad hardware would be I don't know. I think it would inspire a lot of people. Maybe we should do that on a hackathon at some
Maybe,
point.
yeah, that's okay. Well, we hit an hour, and I think no one wants to listen to us talk for I don't, an hour, or definitely not more. So we should wrap here. But
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
still
fun chatting us.
doubtful that anyone wants to listen to us, but if
If
it's
you want
three
us to
people.
keep doing this, let us know. Yeah, or else we'll probably stop. Okay,
All right.
cool.
See ya.